It's me, David at DCES UK, for a little good old-fashioned tech tipple. So today I'm talking induced voltages and earthing, and maybe also actual voltages and earthing. Either way, I'm hearing earthing, and I've made an exciting alteration to my trusty test rig to show something that I've shown before, actually, albeit a long time ago and in not quite the same way. But, well, hey, my Strongbow stockpile is rather depleted, so I need to find something to make content on so that YouTube can help keep me in the tipsy manner to which I've become accustomed. I'm not sponsored by Strongbow. Nice. Enough of this ado. Let's do by starting with an Instagram post from a familiar face. The great electrical hard man, that is James Beck.
I'm gonna f you up.
Alright James, keep your hair on. I'm going to credit you for your efforts, so don't go full nuclear on us. Here is James reporting from an EICR he was engaged upon this week, where he found a potential difference of 48 volts between metalwork on two adjacent light switches, which raises three important questions. Number one, what kind of a fucking moomin installs a decorative finish light switch next to a white plastic one? And number two, why does James have no GS38 shrouds on his fluke voltage tester? And number three, what's the reason for there being a measurable potential difference of 48 volts between exposed conductive parts on these two accessories anyway? Taking those in order, I'm afraid I cannot answer point one because I don't know what's going through the mind of someone who wants a light switch on a badly painted wall to look bling when there's a plain white one sat right next to it. I can answer point two because, like James, I find GS38 to be so restrictive that it often physically gets in the way of my trying to take a voltage measurement, to the point where sometimes these shrouds get caught on a screw head and prevent the tip from reaching the live metalwork, making it look like what I'm trying to measure is dead, which defeats the whole purpose of using a cocking contact voltage tester in the first place. So I am also guilty of discarding them, and yes, I know that's ironic considering I just put out a Save for September video, but GS38 gets a little too nanny state, and I imagine James, like me, figures he's adult enough to make his own risk assessment on the matter. As for point three, why we're seeing what we're seeing, let me explain what James has found with today's jerry rig to my test rig that recreates the scenario. Like James, I have two light switches here. I suspect James is served two different lighting points. Mine serve the same lighting point. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of demonstrating this fault. It'll all be the same. The metal switch has a protective conductor attached, and the plastic switch sits atop a metal knockout box, which also has a protective conductor attached. Hence, this metalwork and these faceplate screws ought to be earthed. When I wibble on about conductive parts, they will either be exposed or extraneous. Looking in BS 7671 Chapter 2 definitions, we can see exposed parts of things like my metal switch and metal knockout box. That is to say, conductive items that are part of the electrical installation, which ought to be at 0 volts under non-fault conditions, but which may raise in potential in the event of a fault occurring. Extraneous conductive parts would be something like a radiator or metallic gas pipes. Such would be nothing to do with the electrical installation, nonetheless they are electrically conductive. On James's Instagram post we can see that he was using a Fluke T130, which is a proper voltage tester, and that it shows 48 volts. However, he would have seen something different had he used a standard multimeter, such as this fine Chauvin Anu CA757, which one happens to keep on one's hip for everyday use. I'm not sponsored by Chauvin Anu. Placing the probes of my multimeter between the metalwork of switch 1 and the screws of switch 2, James would likely have seen something much higher than his 48 volts. Indeed, here I'm getting something nearer 115 volts. Wowzers, something's surely wrong there. That'll give me a kick to remember if I were to touch any of this metalwork, especially both simultaneously, no? Wait. Nothing. Not even a cock twitch. How can that be? Well, let me break out my own contact voltage tester, in this case my now sadly obsolete yet nonetheless wholly reliable TIS-845. Shoving this son of a bitch between the supposedly earthed metallic parts gives a paltry and not at all scary 7 volts instead of the 115 volts we observed just a moment ago. So what gives? Well, firstly, when we measure voltage with any instrument, the impedance of that instrument dictates the number displayed on the screen. I can show this better with another TIS device, my E217 multimeter. Honestly, I know how it looks, but I'm really not sponsored by TIS. or Strongbow. Set to the normal AC setting, the E217 reads something similar to what we saw on the Chauvin 757. However, this meter also has a low impedance AC input which, if selected, now gives something akin to the puny nonce voltage my dedicated voltage tester displayed. Most multimeters only have a high impedance input which limits the current through them and gives an accurate voltage reading. However, this can give something of a false reading under no load conditions like we have here. Yes, there is a potential difference between the exposed conductive parts of the metalwork for these two switches, but that potential has absolutely no balls behind it and is all mouth and trousers. I can sum it up visually with the aid of this gentleman, filmed during last month's Farage riots. When viewed on a multimeter, we can see he's all voltage and giving it the fucking big un. However, let's switch to a proper low impedance voltage indicator like my TIS and James's Fluke and watch what happens. There's the first probe connected, and if I were to bring in the second probe... yes, the posturing voltage at the fore and in our faces just a moment ago has been rightly replaced by a sharp dose of regret to the testicles. Let's just see a slow motion action replay of that. We start with our asshole voltage having it large, indeed a full 115 volts of fuck stupid track-suited online bingo playing Weatherspoon's patron yelling three figures into our voltmeter. However, when we introduce a dedicated voltage indicator, represented here by these bricks, to our beer-bellied chav friend, we may observe the short-dicked wanker collapse to nothing quicker than an aged rent boy's already well-rimmed and thoroughly prolapsed asshole after a heavy night on the game, followed by an ill-advised and particularly jalapeno-heavy tapas. In the same way, as already shown, I can give my 115 volts 2 fingers here and feel... nothing. It might have shouted about being a 3-digit wide boy on my multimeter, but this ponce can't drive any kind of load, which is why it's sometimes referred to as a floating or phantom voltage. That's not to say this voltage can't be more substantial, and indeed what James measured on his dedicated indicator was much higher at 48 volts against my piss puny 7 volts today. Nonetheless, what both James and I are seeing can deliver an unpleasant zap, as described when I covered this topic 4 years ago in an admittedly strange video where lockdown gave me too much time on my hands and a customer had called us in after receiving a tingle or two when fingering her brass.
Desperate.
That's reason number one why a voltage indicator is more suited for safe isolation than a multimeter. If I'd have measured 115 volts, I'd be shitting my underpinnings about what's gone wrong here and what I can even touch. But my dedicated voltage tester assures me, although there is a voltage present, it hasn't got the minerals to make me involuntarily lose control of my bowels. Unlike the Strongbow. I already told you, I'm not sponsored by Strongbow! If I were to open up both of these switches, I would physically see a circuit protective conductor installed on each. One goes to the metalwork of this decorative plate, the other to the metal back box that the screws of this plastic faceplate attach to. Surely both protective conductors go back to the main earthing terminal, no? Well, no, obviously not if there's a potential difference between them. One of them is earthed back to the MET, the other, as I said, is floating. Which is which? Well, that's reason number 1.5 for using a dedicated voltage tester. I'm not going to say reason 2 because many such devices lack this feature. However, my 845 here will give a warning of voltage presence with just one probe touching. Observe. With just one probe contacting the metalwork, there's already an audible indication and a warning light giving me a heads up that something is buzzing on these screws. This thing can smell voltage like a tramp can smell loose change and special brew. A multimeter with one probe connected might give all sorts on the display, maybe something useful, maybe complete nonsense, but at least the 845 is telling me to fuck about and find out with caution. Moving that same probe to the metal switch and I get the fat end of fuck all, so I suspect my fault is on the upper switch. Because the 845 also has continuity, I can place one probe to a known working earthed part and the other to my metal switch to determine that yes, the metal switch is indeed earthed back to the common bar. Moving to the upper switch, and I again get that floating voltage that we saw before. That's the 7 volts on the display there. In James's case, it was the metal switch at fault. In my case, it's the plastic one. That's just for increased safety here in the cave. I'm going to leave my modified rig as it is, and I don't want this metal switch to not be earthed. But it doesn't make any difference which way around things are. The cause of the fault is the same. So let's look at that then, fools. Here's a graphical representation of what this might look like. Not quite what James was seeing, as I'm only using one lamp, but again, it all boils down to the same shit. Switch 1, the metal switch, has here a good circuit protective conductor. If wired in twin and earth, that earthing conductor to the switch runs between two other cores, a permanently energised line and an occasionally energised switch line, and it has continuity throughout from the exposed metal of the switch plate all the way back to the supplier's earth, back at the source of the installation. Let's bring in switch 2, again not the same configuration as James had, but it'll behave in the same way. Switch 2 also has a circuit protective conductor, and as before, this runs within a cable between other switching cores, one of which is permanently energised. However, this protective conductor is not connected back to the main earthing terminal because it has been cut off by some dickhead kitchen fitter, DIYer, or electrical engineer. As this CPC is in proximity with a live energised conductor throughout the length of the cable, albeit electrically separated by that live conductor's insulation, it is nonetheless capacitively coupled to that conductor because the electric field radiating from it induces a voltage onto our disconnected CPC. That means when we place a multimeter or a voltage tester between floating earth and real earth, we'll see a potential difference, albeit one that talks a good fight but doesn't pack a decent punch. Kind of like how flabby gobshite Elon Musk offered to fight Mark Zuckerberg before he tucked his tiny chode between his legs and ran away like the half-daft frat boy wankstain he really is. Normally the electric field of an energised conductor would be dampened by the presence of a working earth, but a disconnected CPC instead acts as an antenna and sucks up a voltage in the same way as a hairy-arsed builder's radio loudly sucks up the kitsch music and horrible has-beens of Radio 2, much to the annoyance of all other trades who happen to be working on site. That induced voltage can have amplitude enough for you to fucking feel it. James's 48 volts is more impressive than the 7 volts I can drag out here, but I'm limited to what I can demonstrate on my rig. James gets better numbers because he has a longer wiring run and his floating CPC is jacketed inside a twin and earth cable, which puts the CPC at very close proximity to the electric field of the line conductor. In my setup, I only have a few meters to play with, looped inside this box here, and my wiring is in single, so I can't wind it as tightly together as cores within the same cable would be. I've also had to run my floating CPC here on the outside, and that's just to keep it away from any working earth or neutral conductors to stop them from dampening the voltage I have managed to induce upon it. Two more reasons for using a voltage tester over a multimeter would be that it's impossible to have it on the wrong setting, which might give a false result. These things are always ready to read voltage, even if they have other features such as continuity, and they will always work even if the batteries are flat. Some don't even take batteries. Going back to this fault then, and in James's case, some dip-it asshole had chopped the CPC off at a junction in the attic, which is why he was seeing a phantom voltage. And it's interesting because James says he was told the property should be safe, as their father-in-law is an electrical engineer, actually. One of the worst properties I ever performed an electrical inspection on was back in 2016 at a house in Offchurch, where an old boy had died and his son proudly stated his dad had been an electrical engineer, and it all ought to be cock and indeed on. Yet that place was an electrical nightmare. Maybe the lad's dad was dynamite with the mathematics on paper or something, but the brutal fact was the old chuffer, who was now wiring up daisies from below, couldn't physically wire out power or lighting from above to save his life. In fact, the dickhead had put his own life at risk, along with anyone else who'd ever visited his home, with his idiotic mess of junction boxes hacked into the house wiring, spidering off with cables undersized for the protective device, unearthed metalwork, exposed basic insulation, exposed live parts, electrical tape tomfoolery, and all sorts of other horrors. So yeah, beware the electrical engineer, because getting something to work doesn't mean it's being done in a way that's safe or compliant. Although James managed to locate the junction where his CPC had been disconnected, let's assume I can't fix the earthing here in my bullshit setup. Maybe the homeowner has just decorated the place and I can't get to where the break is because they won't authorise the decorative damage, or perhaps it's simply not practicable to run a new protective conductor to my floating metalwork. Is that a problem if the switch is plastic? Not necessarily, because Regulation 410.3.9 will gently cup your balls by allowing fault protection to be emitted for exposed conductive parts with reduced dimensions, a maximum of 50 by 50 millimeters, or where their disposition is such they cannot be gripped or come into significant contact with a part of the human body. So as long as my plastic and non-conductive switch accessory remains plastic and isn't changed for a metal one by a bungling kitchen fitter, DIYer or an electrical engineer, we don't need to worry about a rogue voltage appearing on the screw heads, even if it is uncomfortable to touch them for any length of time. Because who the fuck's asking you to touch them for any length of time, and why are you complying? That's just on an existing installation, of course. If this situation were something new that I'd just installed, Regulation 411.3.1.1 would apply. Because that sugarless motherfucker? It states exposed conductive parts will be connected to a protective conductor that itself runs back to the earthing system in use, so I can't use the prior regulation to get around my own bad workmanship. Although of course that would never be needed, because I'm a fucking electrical installation hero. There's one other earthing case I want to talk about. Oh, I know you want to go and click on something more pornographic, but hang in there. I got called out to a job in January 2020 where concerned grandparents reported their granddaughter had received a shock off an ordinary wet system radiator. Had it not been for the RCD, which had duly tripped off in a timely fashion, then things could have potentially been much worse. But how did touching non-electrical metalwork result in a shock and an RCD trip? Time for my Columbo act, which was handy as I already had on a scruffy coat whilst smoking a Havana House cigar. I'm not sponsored by Havana House cigars. A test between the metal radiator and the earth pin of a nearby socket outlet showed continuity, so I figured it was less likely the radiator gave little Jenny a shock, and more likely that she was already holding something at a high voltage potential and that she simultaneously touched the radiator with her other hand, thus giving that potential a means to get to earth through her and the copper pipework back via the water bonding position. So it wasn't the radiator that delivered the shock, as Granny and Grandad had believed. Instead, the radiator had provided a path for current to flow to, as it was itself at a 0 volt potential compared to whatever little Jenny was holding. A tour of the room she'd been in revealed few electrical items. A television set was about the only thing in there, and that couldn't be the source as it was class 2 or double insulated. When quizzed further, it transpired little Jenny had been holding her iPad at the time. Okay, so a battery appliance won't do it either. Unless... was it on charge, I asked? Yes, it was, and it was plugged into this Chinese bullshit brand nonsense flogged by a popular online retailer who don't bother vetting if goods hawked through their portal meet British standards. It's falling apart here because I removed the screws back in the day to make a video about the thing that I never got around to. Fuck is this nonsense? TEC.BEAN? What kind of wank branding is that? Cock off, YouTube. I'm definitely not sponsored by fucking TEC.BEAN. When I cracked it open, the fault was obvious. You can see it has USB charge ports, but it also has LED power indicators, and these are driven directly from the mains. 230 volts goes in, through the switch, then out to a diode, for half-wave rectification I imagine, through the LED and through a 100k resistor to neutral. Pushing the switch illuminates the indicator and provides power for these outlets. It's sloppily constructed with none of those indicator components on a PCB, so the resistor and diode are simply floating about inside the casing. When one peers inside, and I don't know if you can see it from this picture, I have magnified it on the right there, the diode in that described arrangement, which is at 230 volts as it comes straight off the line connection, is improperly in touch contact with the metal shroud of one USB connector. That meant the metalwork of that connector, along with the shielding of the charge cable and, it seems, the metallic rear of little Jenny's iPad, were all at a live potential when she had it plugged in on charge. I can prove that for you by using my voltage indicator. With the lower switch off, the diode isn't energised, and if I touch my voltage indicator to the USB port metalwork, nothing happens. Now let's turn this fucking LED on by pushing the switch. Immediately, a one-probe connection of my TIS-845 homes in on the voltage like a television B-lister getting a whiff of free cocaine at an industry party they were barely invited to. Now if I place the other probe on an earthed part, well there we have it folks, the full Monty right at the interface where you or yours would plug in the very phone or tablet you happen to be holding in your hand. And that banal act might be the end of you. Frankly, I'm amazed nothing in here or in the kid's iPad blew the fuck up. And of the 4 USB ports on this thing, only one is affected, making it a game of Russian roulette whenever anyone unwary wanted to place a gadget on charge. This is why trading standards are always telling you to buy the likes of chargers and batteries from recognised brands and high street retailers with bona fide British standard markings. The internet is otherwise awash with crap like this. Although if you search Amazon for TEC.BEAN today, all you seem to get is a fucking tens machine, so I guess those assholes finally figured they could use their expertise in delivering electricity into the human body in a more legitimate way. As for this miserable accident waiting to happen, frankly, it sat around here for 4 years waiting for me to show you its horror construction, so now that I have, it's time the cocksucker was permanently put out of everybody's misery.
The goddamn kitty cat!
Jesus Christ, alright James, keep your hair on, fucking hell. Some quick garden coffee shout outs. I'm going to have to be quick here because it's a very angry sky over there. I don't think this sun's going to hold out and things are going to get very wet very quickly. What a summer this has been. Doesn't stop me on the white wine there. Courtesy of Andrew Curl, so special mention to Andrew Curl for the white wine. Thank you very much for that. He cut out the whole buy me a booze middleman and just got me some vino dispatched straight from Amazon. I'm all for that. Moving on to the actual coffee shouts, we start off with the whore that is Damien. Good choice of soundtrack on that Manor House video, says Damien. Thank you, Damien. Yeah, it was a bit of a banger, wasn't it? Sorry if there's any noise in the background, by the way. National Grid are digging up outside my driveway. Apparently there's a neutral fault in the street. Doesn't affect me, but other than the fact I can't park on the driveway. And if you hear a chicken being strangled, it's the bloody electric gate on the golf course that needs oiling. Anyway. The whore that is M Stock Electrical, who leaves no message. But I'm always happy to take your money, M Stock Electrical. Thank you very much for your donation. Another whore from someone who normally leaves no message but has done this time, Mr. Humbug, whose message is, I haven't got anything nice to say, so I shan't say anything at all. At least you made some effort there, Mr. Humbug, but it's always nice to see you appear on here. The whore that is Nigel Tupman. This donation is not as fat as Louise, but I'm sure it'll help. Cheers. Yeah, that Louise video is a bit of a nasty one, wasn't it? I got accused of being quite misogynistic on that. Well, I'm not misogynistic, but yes, I didn't come across particularly well, so I'm sorry about that. Barry Khan, a virgin. Oh, we got a newbie. Thank you so much for your great videos. Your guidance is helping me with self-study. It is much appreciated. Well, I'm glad you're getting something out of it. And good luck with your studying. Another virgin. Fucking aeroplane now. Mrs. Deces. Somehow I doubt it is Mrs. Deces. She's in there with a face like thunder as always. I fucking love electrical services, especially the limited kind. Definitely no, that's not her. The whore, that is Jay Sargent, who liked the demo video. Good to see old kit rejuvenated and not just launched into the bin. Yes, Tascade Junkie weren't so impressed at my replacing fluorescent with LED, but what can you do when you got oddball T4s? Anyway, it's back in business. Oh, promotion to for Brad Greytrix, pun writer extraordinaire. I've used a couple of his gags. Stolen, I should say, a couple of his gags, but thank you, Brad. Have something nice. Well, I will. The virgin, that is James Pritchard. James contacted me because he's having trouble with AFDDs up in Manchester tripping off on a commercial site. And it sounds to me, I mean, I've not been up there of course, but it sounds to me like it's that RF thing like Julian and I saw in the cave, because he's got motor loads and several AFDDs on the same phase but serving different circuits are all tripping out together, which makes it sound more like it's RF. They're Schneider ones. So yeah, that's quite interesting. I don't know quite what he's going to do about that, but we had a bit of a discussion a week ago about that problem. The whore that is David Patterson, who liked the Aesop's Fable video. Fabulous graphics and message, says David. Well, thank you very much, David. Another unusual one, that one. Only one super wanks. Colin Ritchie 1510, who is a yellow super wanking promotion to whore. Congratulations, Colin Ritchie 1510. Some quick special mentions, aside from Andy Curler. Oh, bollocks, the sun's gone in. Craig and Taylor, whom I met in Wakefield, octopus installers. But nice chaps. We had a couple of ciders at the bar there at a Holiday Inn when I was up there a couple of weeks ago, so it was nice to bump into you chaps. Speaking of bumping into people, Mason at CEF, whom I met at the counter this week. Nice to see you in CEF. Hope you got your job sorted, Mason. Charlie at the train station, he bumped into me and Linda and gave us a wave. That was a few weeks ago, wasn't it, Charlie? But finally getting around to giving you the shout here. And also, you may wonder what this kit's doing around here. This is from Darren Summer on Instagram. He sent me a couple of the TEC lunch boxes. We've got the KT56 RCD tester here. And we've got the KT45 loop tester. I do have these in robin form, but it's nice to see them in their TEC colours, calibrated in 2006, as was this. Excuse me. A very interesting thing. This whole mega jobber here. Isn't that a nice thing? Still works, he says. There you go. Does something. Continuity and insulation resistance tester, analog of course, so pretty much the same thing as my quite new Chauvin's CA6513, which itself was acquired to replace my Hyoki 3490 that got robbed off the van in February. So there you go. I've got lots of these things now. But I do like that. When was that last calibrated? That's also 2006. But that still works perfectly. A nice thing. One other thing came in the post this week, a book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism. I've no idea who from. There's no covering letter or anything, but thank you anyway for the reading material. I'll have to part the pages, I suppose, and see what that's all about. That's that for this video. I better get this lot in before the heavens open. So much for this summer. Salute.